Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile 2 video. Build idea, not build guide, build idea. I've talked about this multiple times. I will repeat myself in basically every video because I want to make sure people understand why I'm not posting build guides. And that is because we don't have access to the current skill tree in proper format. We only have a picture. Don't even know what the nodes are doing. Because of that, no one will be able to post a proper build guide. It's all just guesswork. Sure, a lot of these things could be educated guesses. That's where I'm at. But I'm not going to stoop down to the idea of just clickbaiting people into, thinking it's a league starter build guide or that it's going to be the most broken new meta. We all know about those channels. I'll maintain my integrity and I'll post build ideas, things that I feel confident in promoting. But for this one, I'm not 100% confident in this one. I'll tell you that much. It's a pretty cool idea. I like the idea of it. And I'm going to walk you guys through it. Let's go into it. First and foremost, there's a lot of changes happening to defensive layers. Evasion's getting deflection as a 0.3, which is really strong, which is kind of crazy to me because evasion was already really strong in 0.2. However, they're making changes to armor as well to let armor mitigate some of elemental damage taken, as an example. And that's kind of where I got the idea together with my right-hand man, Mr. Lolash, as I was theory crafting yesterday evening. And the idea we came into was, with the idea of making armor mitigate elemental damage, we could go back to the first initial thing, which was one of the highest DPS builds that I played, which was very fun to do back at 0.1, which was a Titan Summoner Doryani prototype. Now, for those of you who don't know what Doryani's prototype is, let me explain what the Doryani's prototype is doing. It is a body armor with armor evasion rating, and what it does is that it provides you a little bit of HP, but armor that you have also applies to lightning damage taken from hits. Very important to point out that it's from hits and hits alone, because if there is any lightning damage over time effects, armor would not mitigate that. However, unlike Path of Exile 1, in PoE 2, there are currently no lightning damage over time sources. However, the Doryani's prototype also makes it so that enemies in your presence have the exact same lightning resistance equal to yours. And this presence is basically your entire screen, or more or less your entire screen. So the radius is pretty forgiving. And lightning resistance does not affect lightning damage taken. So this means that if you have negative lightning res, which is the purpose of a Doryani's prototype approach, which you can achieve through a variety of different ways, but most notably something like Ventur's Gamble's rings that can roll both negative and positive resistance rolls, as well as Spirit, which is very attractive for minion builds in general. But what it does is that lightning resistance does not affect lightning damage that you take. So if you take 1,000 lightning damage, you do not mitigate that with your elemental resistances being lightning res in this case. Instead, you'll be mitigating this with your armor. The problem here is that we are in a position where that is not very good, but they're making buffs to armor, so I don't know what's going to happen to the skill tree. So I wanted to take a look and see what kind of elemental mitigation modifiers can we get when it comes to the actual calculations of armor mitigating elemental damage. Are we going to be able to utilize such modifiers that would mitigate the damage first and then have armor also mitigate the remaining hit? Or will they be calculated at the same time? Or are we going to find available nodes on the tree or gear that we can actually flip over damage from, for example, lightning to be taken as another source? I have no idea about these things until we actually see things in action. So I wanted to make a video on it because with all these changes and they're trying to make armor look attractive, I figured this is something we definitely got to keep our eyes open for. Like I said earlier in the start of this video, I am not 100% confident in this because we do have to see how things operate and how they work, and I'm not certain on anything here. But I wanted to make the video to bring it to light. This is something I'll be keeping my eyes on after I'm done with Spectres, because that is my current focus for the League launch. So now that we know what Doryani's prototype is doing and the fact that we can use Ventur's Gambles to lower the lightning resistance on these rings, we are then able to be in a position where we can get to the maximum negative cap, which is -200. And now we have tons of damage. But where is our defense coming from outside of what I just explained when it comes to the Ascendancy choice? So we're going to run this as an actual Titan. First off, we get the rucksack, which is the colossal capacity, but that gives us hulking form. Hulking form is also very important for the idea that if we have sources of flipping over damage taken to other sources, such as lightning damage taken to be taken as fire or cold or something, I have no idea if this is going to exist on the tree, but time will tell. My hopes is that something like that will exist. Hulking form will allow us to further push how much that's providing as long as it's a small passive. What it also does is that it allows us to scale minion-related nodes, and more importantly, it allows us to scale nodes such as spirit nodes. This 2% spirit would instead be 3%. This 3% spirit would instead be 4% because decimals are rounded down in the PoE. So that's an example of what we can do with that. Another thing we can do is obviously for the third Ascendancy, pick up 15% more life. Outside of that, we have a couple of other things, but you have, for example, 50% more armor from equipped body armor, which finally goes into the idea of, hey, you want to scale armor to defensive layers. We want to have a percent of our armor mitigating elemental damage taken. This allows us to further emphasize on that defensive layer. Is it going to be enough? I don't know. Maybe there aren't any sources to flip lightning damage taken to cold or fire or chaos, whatever. And if that's the case, then the idea would be to scale and push armor to really high levels to mitigate the damage. And I don't know if it's enough. So again, it's a build idea, not a build guide. Another thing I wanted to point out is what kind of minions do we want to use for this? And this is where we go to the topic of storm mages. And before you say, yo, GHAZZY, stop. They nerfed the storm mages. They nerfed them. They're so bad. Stop. I'm here to tell you that I don't think the storm mages got that big of a nerf that you might think they did. First and foremost, they did get a buff on their commandment ability, but this is not something I'll be caring about when it comes to a build like this, where we use Doryani's prototype. However, what it also says is that the bolt and shocked ground radius is now 2 meters, previously 1.8. Projectiles now chain 2 times at all gem levels, previously it was 2 to 4. Now, first and foremost, it does say projectiles, but what I want to point out is that skeletal storm mages are using an arc ability. They're not using any arc ability, they're using the arc ability. The problem they had was in many cases, they would run up to the enemy target, then start shooting arc when they were aggroed enough to start casting, but their cast range was out of range, making them, basically the result was them hitting the ground in front of the target, dealing 0 damage. Hopefully this will be fixed, but here's the thing. Arc for players saw a change, and then didn't see any change. The change they did was that it turned it into an actual projectile, if I can find it. Thank you. Arc is now a projectile. It no longer causes explosions against shocked enemies and no longer a payoff skill. It now chains 69 times instead of 5 to 8. It now has 50% more shock magnitude, which is pretty big, and can now consume lightning infusion to chain additional times and deal more damage. Now deals 2 to 39 damage level 5, and then a little bit more damage to higher levels as a result to back off for not having the extra damage from the explosions and whatnot. Quality increases chains instead of the more damage per remaining chain. That is the new arc. It is not safe, but pretty high probability that the arc that the storm mages are using is seeing the exact same change. Now, if that's the case, again, it's a build idea. There's a lot of question marks, and I have not gotten an answer from GHAZZY about this. If arc is changed into projectile storm mages, that will allow us to use projectile-based support gems for the storm mages to begin with, on top of the fact that the whole them shooting arc into the ground, not hitting their targets, will be fixed. All of these things speaks very well in favor of storm mages becoming a powerhouse of a clearing minion to use. Now, again, this is a kind of a far-fetched build idea, I guess, but this is the idea I have, and I've always liked playing Doryani's prototype. A lot of you guys that have played Path of Exile 1 might be sick of it because of how insanely good it was as a meta build back in the Mercenary League that everyone's been playing in Path of Exile 1 as of late. However, I'm here to tell you that in PoE 2, I will be keeping my eyes open for a build just like this I'm trying to explain in this video. But, ultimately, it all comes down to whether or not the arc ability from the Storm Mages is seeing the same treatment to the player version of the skill. which is turning into a projectile. And obviously defensively, we don't know if the elemental mitigation based on your armor will be enough to make lightning damage hits feels manageable. And we don't know if the life itself will actually feel sustainable in a build like this compared to something that we do know is already really good, such as energy shield evasion, at which point you might be more inclined to plan something like an infernalist, lich, ritualist, tactician, or Gemlin legionnaire. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. Another thing to point out is that you could do like a Doryani's prototype run as an infernalist, as altered flesh does exist, where it's converting 20% of lightning damage taken into fire damage instead. So there is that option. The problem I have with the infernalist is that you kind of want to go for the seething body for the presence. You and allies in presence gain 50% damage as extra fire, but as a minion build, you're also kind of forced into the idea of Beta's will to reserve life to get spirit. And that means that you're now cutting down a quarter of your HP, which now heavily incentivizes you not to get HP as your main focus of defensive layer. So then you want to scale HP for your spirit, but you also want to scale HP for your defense. And that puts you into the idea of either one of these two nodes, either a mind over matter split into making your life also provide mana, or in this case, having your life also provide energy shield and turn into an energy shield approach, and maybe even energy shield evasion. The problem with those approaches is that the Doryani's prototype doesn't really work that well when it comes to the baseline defensive stats. However, it does provide you with armor and evasion rating, and this is one of the main reasons why I'm more in favor of looking at a Titan for this specific build idea. I feel like I've been ranting on and on very long in this video. I just wanted to make this and try to elaborate and explain my kind of approach to my thinking when it comes to this build. I've always liked Storm Mages. I've always liked Doryani's prototype. Back in PoE 1, I've used it for many years over there. And in PoE 2, I've used it in 0.1 and had a blast with it. Defensively, it was a bit lacking, and I'm hoping that will change in 0.3. So again, I'm just going to keep my eyes open. Here's a build idea. Maybe it's something we can do some really crazy stuff with. Too many question marks for me to be confident in it, but I wanted to make the idea to showcase it to you guys. Anyways, I'm going to leave you guys alone. And on your way out, boys, hit the like button, subscribe for more content. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Till then, stay safe and keep rocking.